Yes, I was very excited. There was something in the water around that SEDA period, Sustainable Energy Development Authority. There's a wonderful American woman, Kathy Zoe, who just inspired this army of people, and they keep popping up, you know? And I was really lucky to be on that board years and years ago. And so, yeah, still have that kind of gene. This is a story which is, you know, a little bit like a fairy tale, and it's in the making, so still working hard to make it come out of the ground. But if I could leave one idea with you, it would be that we are in this time of exponential change. So, you know, change was a little bit more linear, you know, year after year after year, and now it's kind of more exponential. So the way one person puts it, we will learn more about the human brain in the next 6 months than the history of accumulated knowledge of the human brain. And then in the 6 months after that, we're going to double it. And it's easy to think that that somehow is happening with technology out there, but that pace of change actually is happening in business models and in the community sector. And it's partly because we communicate with each other differently, don't we, compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago, as well as the change in the tools that are out there. So how do we take advantage of that exponential curve? Because the risks also are exponential. So that's kind of the bottom line. Now, I'm just hoping that this works. And so far, it's not very exciting, but it could be. And indeed it works. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about renewable energy other than to say that we are undergoing a very significant transition in the world's energy model. And partly that's because the cost curve for renewable energies is declining, whereas the costs for fossil fuel-based energy are rising as we gradually incorporate the costs of climate change. And so as a result, the transformation is on. And the question is, what kind of transformation are we, you know, likely to have? Do we want to have? And there's some good news. If we think about, you know, some of these statistics, we already now have a pipeline of large-scale commercial renewable energy. We have quite an astounding rooftop, you know, sort of propensity in Australia. So we're really kind of leading the world on that. If you imagine 20 years from now, what that might look like, because the learning curves are so different, it's very, very hard to predict. So in the same way as if I held up my iPhone here, it would have the same computational power as what used to be a computer about the size of this room at Stanford University in 1970. How do I know that? Because my family moved from Brazil to California for my dad to do a PhD in computer science at Stanford in 1970. And he would come home and he would print on these big printers as we had back then, you know, Maria, I love you, that was my mother. And literally, that entire room is now in my iPhone. And that's partly because of something called Moore's Law. And Moore was one of the founders of Intel, and he predicted that the transistors on a chip, there would be twice as many every year. And so the power of them would grow exponentially. And it turns out that for 30 years, that has been happening. It's slowed down a touch, but as a result of that, you know, we have ubiquity in terms of communication technology, and all these wonderful applications can now happen. There also is something called the Swanson Law. And Swanson was one of the early founders of solar PV. And if you Google that, what it shows is every time you double the capacity of solar in the planet, you reduce the cost by 20%. And that feels very marginal when you start at like 0.2 of 1%. But then you go to 1%, we're now like close maybe to 3%, and just do the math. With exponential curves, you very quickly double. So, you know, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and suddenly you have people like Ray Kurzweil, the head of engineering at Google, saying that the whole world could be solar in 10 years. And that's why, because of those cost structures. And if you look at this transition from above, you get some drivers, and obviously environmental priorities, climate change, the fact that resources are scarce, all of these things come to bear. You also have some, really clear urbanization trends. We're moving to cities. The energy model has to change for us all to live there. We have, this pressure from population growth for distributed solutions, localized solutions. You then get these quite global governance factors. The Paris Agreement is driving that in terms of pricing. The rise of the Asian century, and the fact that India and China have indicated they're going to really push the renewable route. And then, of course, you have these new technologies where the cost curves are really coming down very, very quickly. But if you look at the same picture from the bottom up, what you see is a very community-led transition. And it's not just about the environment generically as an issue, it's about local environments under threat, people perceiving the places they live in have changed. Really learning about ecosystem threats and the fact that we're on in terms of an extinction of biodiversity that, is unparalleled for some time. And then alongside that, we feel like something isn't quite right. Things are not affordable. People are being left behind in that transition. We know that we have a social cohesion, a kind of equity challenge that also is at play. And it's the very social capital of our communities that sometimes feels like it's eroding, because these big companies are kind of making the calls and getting the profits, and decisions are made somewhere else, and we're the mugs at the end of that equation. And then I remember about an hour, 2 hours ago, someone said corruption. And actually, it does feel a little bit like corruption, doesn't it? When you hear about billions of your tax dollars going to subsidize big Indian companies that, are going to create investments that may not last for more than a couple of years. How did we get to this kind of democracy? I'm not even going to go to the US because that is just a temporary blip. We're going to consider that a temporary blip. So in Queensland, what we experienced around the speed of that change, with a very different kind of decision-making model, was a very deep proliferation of coal seam gas. So farmers on the ground and communities around them began to realize, this is really quite a big change in the landscape. And it felt a little bit like, well, how long is this for? Because the farming is going to be here for a long, long time. And what is this doing to the water table? And just some unknown risks around that. And it really was coming south quickly, right? Because the same companies thought, lots of assets over the border in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia. And so the community began to organize itself in very creative ways, because it turns out that there's this kind of funny alignment that happens with agrarian interests, environmental interests, community development interests. And sometimes even people that don't believe that climate change is human-induced have grave concerns about the water table and sustainable farming. And so there was a pretty full-on protest movement around that kind of movement south of the New South Wales border in the Northern Rivers region. And this was really going on in full force around kind of 2011, 2012. Very active, lock the gate signs everywhere. I used to hoon around in motorcycles around the region, and there are signs everywhere, and including restaurants and whatever else. And a lot of it culminated in this almighty blockade in a place called Bentley. And this actually is Bentley, and literally thousands of people showed up and stayed and just said, no, we're just not going to let you do it. This fight stops here. And interestingly, the New South Wales government, was also responding to Alan Jones. How wild is that, right? So you have this pretty right-wing shock jock who's agreeing with the farmers and saying this, and the environmentalist conveniently kind of overlooking the fact that he definitely thinks climate change is, a big kind of evil plot, but who cares? It was a political cocktail for risk, because elections, sadly, are really ways for politicians to stay employed. That's what it's come down to in this country, and pretty much around the world. So they realized that actually there are votes on the line here. And so they wanted to stay employed. And so rather miraculously, in the Northern Rivers region, we were able to actually turn around policy around coal seam gas. And that happened at the end of 2014. And there was a tremendous kind of social movement around that, and a lot of very, very capable people, and asking the question, okay, well, what next? Like, we don't want to just say no, we want to say yes. And out of that came this idea that if we, the community, could own our own energy retailer, then we could buy the kind of energy that we, the community, want to buy, and that would encourage us, the community, to produce that very energy that we want to buy. And by the way, it seems like a pretty profitable industry. They seem to report pretty healthy profit margins, so maybe there is a business here. And if there is a business, then maybe we could even employ some people locally. And jobs in Byron that aren't related to, barista and pubs and, hotels are really hard to come by. So the idea that we might have an energy company and a call center, oh my God, and that we might even fund our local web developers and our local marketing people and lawyers and whatever to build a business was pretty exciting. So that was kind of the beginning. And really, the transition that we're talking about is, it's kind of like an energy model that goes from digging stuff out of the ground, way out there, putting it on trucks and transporting it to another place where you then burn it up 24/7, and then it goes over these transmission wires and through these poles and wires, and then, oh, there's our little houses at the end there. So that's a system. It's a system that's been with us for some time, but the idea was that we wanted to reverse the order and actually create a customer-centric model, which actually is connected to the renewables that we generate locally, and hopefully around the country as well, in a market that's very liquid and tradable. And we have some backup battery storage, care of Elon Musk and many others, that can help us, when there's no sun and no wind, to actually keep that current. And that we can find ways to actually connect to large commercial scale, wind, solar, hydro, and really bring that back to the household. So reverse the nature of the energy system. And so we step back in the region, and when I say we now at this stage, I feel like a total pimple on the end of all of this, and even like a little bit of a, oh my God, am I a perv even standing here? Because I was invited to join the board in the middle of 2015, and I'll tell you the little journey that we went on, because every startup has its own, sort of trail. So I really was just so lucky to get involved, but there have been people involved from day one, and those people stepped back and said, look, let's understand what the value chain is for energy. So it starts with generating power, and you can do that in coal-fired power stations, solar, many different ways of generating power. You then have a transmission and network part of the system, which is getting it from where you generate it to where you actually use it. And you then have retail services, right? Those are the people that actually sell power, have the relationship to the household. In some cases, this is a vertical chain, so companies like Origin, Generate, are involved almost all along the chain. Different states have different markets. So New South Wales, they privatize the bit in the middle. In other states, those are still publicly owned, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, you have customers, local residents and businesses, commercial premises, large and small, that are buying the energy. So Enova is the retail end of that chain. And we thought that retail end would be a really important segment to compete in, because it's a way to kind of disrupt and reconnect the system. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. There are 14 competitors, some very big companies. The three big ones dominate 91% of the market. Lots of little startups that have different, things that they do in different ways. And so, query how competitive it is, but there are 14 competitors. And our core strengths, if you think about that, sort of who, where, what, why, when, in a social enterprise, all of those factors hinge around the why. So we were very clear as a community that we wanted to take control of our energy future. And that's the why that drove our business model. We also were unbelievably lucky that at the stage, which I'll share with you in a second on how this all evolved, when we were doing our business model and really doing our feasibility testing, this wonderful guy called Steve Harris, it's all about people, retired. Now, Steve is one of the special people in the energy sector in Australia. For 22 years, he led Origin Energy's sustainability program. He actually developed the Green Power program way back then. Very, very capable senior executive. When Origin bought Country Energy in the Northern Rivers region, Steve became the CEO to integrate the business. And then when he retired, we were in the process of doing our business case, and he went, "Oh my God, I think it stacks up." It's like, "Steve, you couldn't possibly retire, not now." So he agreed to be our founding CEO, which made a big difference because to get an energy license, the regulator needs to see that you have domain knowledge and capability. We also have a really, really good board. I say that, of course, because I'm the pimple on it, but there are some amazing people on it. And one of the wonderful things that happened along the way in the middle of our fundraising is it turns out that the chief financial officer of the National Australia Bank, who had been retired, outed himself as being a total greenie. A guy called Mark Joyner, who moved from Melbourne to Byron. And Mark, of course, was the chairman of the board of JB Weir, Australia's largest wealth management firm, a very credible sort of senior executive. And when he found Enova, he's like, I'm in. So he's also on the board. It's just a very, very capable executive team. That's really important in a startup, especially if you're raising capital. You want to align yourself with people that can give you credibility around governance and transparency. And the other thing is we realized in trying to create a model where we could financially compete against big companies, having a low regional cost base really made a difference. So we don't pay salaries like they do in Sydney or Melbourne. We pay Byron salaries, and people are very, very happy to earn them. I'm looking around here, it's like a very, very different competitive advantage to be in a regional space. And probably the most important thing is our stakeholders, our customers, our shareholders are totally aligned to our purpose. So there's a lot of patience, there's a lot of love, They understand we have challenges, and they share those challenges because they're part of our journey. And because we have such a trusting connection with them, so I'm a technology banker. I started with Morgan Stanley's technology group in San Francisco. I was Macquarie Bank's internet analyst. I'm passionate about technology and business e-commerce. What you need is trust to actually experiment with things like meters and battery experiments and microgrids. And so to have customers that actually know you're not going to rip them off because you are them makes a huge difference. And we have a big, big appetite in that area. And we set up the company so that 50% of our returns go back to our own not-for-profit. We are committed to addressing energy poverty. We don't want to leave people behind that live in social housing, that are unemployed. We have pockets in the Northern Rivers region of high levels of disadvantage alongside very wealthy, capable. So how do we actually make that transition happen? By reinvesting 50% of our profits. And, we can purchase community-generated renewables, which is why retailing is such an interesting part of that value chain. It's just like a, kind of critical thing. It's very funny to give this presentation and pretend that I can read it in that tiny little screen. So. This is a design flaw. You guys need that computer right here for those of us. It's all good. So the last bullet point, which I just snuck around the corner to read. So I mentioned before that, and I have to be careful to not wax too lyrical. I could go on forever with this story. I'm involved with this cooperative research center run out of UTS, Curtin, and QUT called Food Agility, and we're using agile methods to introduce digital technologies across the food value chain. Very exciting new research program. And one of the insights is, sadly, Donald Rumsfeld had a point. We don't know what we don't know. And sometimes even big companies don't really know what the business problem is that they're addressing. So using co-design, co-created models where you sit around the table with different players, different domain knowledge, can actually sharpen up what the issue is. And what we hope to bring to transforming the national landscape is the capacity to help communities like Wollongong to co-design a model that actually works for them, leveraging off our back end, our license, all those things that are hard to get. But this idea that only you in any particular community will be able to co-create what the relevant future is. So that's our model. And here's how it begins to look. Customers, by generating power, not just on their rooftops, but community scale projects, where you put solar on the bowling rink or you come together, and some of you may not realize, but the new convention center in Sydney has a solar array that powers it that was crowdfunded. So, all kinds of new models are coming out of the ground, and we can create that interface to generation by being the retailer. Likewise, so we're starting to work with Essential Energy, which is our distribution company in Northern Rivers, but developing partnerships right across different, transmission distribution companies. Microgrids are ways of connecting with new technology in a spatially coherent sort of area where people can share power, buy from each other. Siemens, other companies are playing into that. And to be able to do that because you have the trust and the lock-in of a local community is going to fast-track that transformation. Now, at this stage, for those of you who think I'm a hippie, yes, there's an element to that. I have been to 72 Grateful Dead concerts. I mean, there definitely is an element to that. But bear one thing in mind. In Germany, they kickstarted this entire thing in 1990 by creating the world's first feed-in tariff, and in 2000 by advancing that feed-in tariff. And that created, all around the world, the marketplace that has driven down the cost of renewables. So you guys have a shot at actually having a safe climate, okay? And today in Germany, 49% of all renewables generated are owned by communities. Okay? So hippies, actually, can have a go here. And, because the services that employ these new technologies are built on trust, we have a shot at transforming how quickly we take them up at a community level. And once those battery level technologies come down a little bit more on the cost curve, and that's happening so quickly right now, then we'll be able to have an even different kind of network distribution model at a local level, where we're sharing, with neighbors, with our own devices, et cetera, et cetera. So if we can find a way to scale this up in a relevant way that's designed by local communities, including local businesses, and that's been a big insight for us. We're now halfway through to breaking even. We need 6,000 customers to be profitable. We have 3,000. And the speed by which we have acquired small businesses and medium-sized businesses from our region just shocked us. It's incredible. Like, people will want to be a part of this. Because they see that it's the future. So this is our model. We retain our OpEx in the region. Our profits are redistributed into this, not-for-profit, direct employment. Returns are local. So there's this kind of internal logic and model that other communities can follow. But I want to give you a sense of the anatomy of what it took to get here. Because, sometimes when we give these presentations, people go, oh, great, we'll do that. It's like, okay, this is what it was like. So the Bentley effect, July 2014, big idea. We can do this. We can actually disrupt the retail side of the market and redirect the way the whole system works locally. And then the feasibility study. And thank goodness, the New South Wales Office of Environment and Heritage gave us a $50,000 grant. And that $50,000 grant is exactly what it took for us to calibrate a really rigorous model. When I got involved, the first thing they did was throw me the spreadsheet. And it was like an Excel file that went from here to, the Novotel Hotel. And we ended up having to hire a special finance company in Sydney to actually calibrate the model to make sure that, you know, all the algorithms were correct and that we really understood. Because to get a license in energy, you have to prove to the regulator that you have enough capital to keep the lights on, right? Until you reach that cash flow positive point of view. So to do that, you have to really understand how many customers, average consumption, average cost, et cetera, and that was hard work. Putting together a board of directors that had the right expertise. I was running a nonprofit in Queensland called Green Cross Australia, you know, dedicated to climate resilience, resilient coastal infrastructure, many digital projects around engaging the community on the impacts of climate change. And the chairman of our board was a lovely guy called Tony Pfeiffer, whose day job was head of alternative energy at Ergon Energy. And Ergon, of course, is in North Queensland, so really understands distributed solutions. And Tony joined our board, which made a big difference. We also got the retired CEO of Sony. So we had digital, we had energy, we had Mark from NAB, myself. The chair of our board is a former Australian Businesswoman of the Year, Alison Crook. Like, you do not want to get between Alison and what Alison wants to do, because that is an untenable position to be in. She's just amazing. And then we wrote the prospectus. Now, I spent 5 years at Morgan Stanley writing prospectuses. I have been on roadshows for, you know, selling chewing tobacco companies, initial public offerings of millions of this, that, and the other. This was a really tricky one because it's what's called a retail prospectus. We were reaching into moms and dad investors, and the regulator says you cannot have any projections, you cannot have any numbers. So it's literally a document this thick with this massive model behind it, but can't say anything, right? Just a few kind of numbers in the background. So, but we did it, and luckily we had support from Baker McKenzie, really wonderful. I'm now thinking this was a bad idea, the lapel mic. But we had really good lawyers that were mostly pro bono, and that also helped. Then we did what we call our initial public offering, because of course we're not listed on the ASX, but you can buy and sell shares on our website. And that was just amazing. I alluded to it on the panel before. So, you know, over several months, and we were doing all these like cocktail parties in Sydney with fancy rich people and institutional impact investors and super funds, and they were all, nah, that you guys, you know, hippies. Not so much hippies, but the challenge was very hard to exit. So when you make an investment, you want to know how you're going to exit that investment, whether you'll be able to sell it on the market or if there's a sale, whatever. And in this case, it was like, buy shares, and maybe someone else will want to buy them, and we'll list them on our website. But the really amazing thing was, like, even though all those other people said no, the community said yes. Every single farmer's market for 3 months, every weekend we had volunteers. Every single one would sell shares. It was incredible. Like, if you guys know music in that area, Mullum, you know, we've got all these blues bands. Every single music event, people selling shares. It was just incredible. And week by week, we're like, excuse my French at this stage, holy shit, we're going to do this on the ground. And we did. So when we hit the 4 million, it was truly incredible, and I'll show you that. And one of the interesting things was in this prospectus, you have to list all of your risks, key risk factors, you know, really deliberately. And one of the risks was we didn't have an energy license. It was like, invest in us, and we may not actually get a license because they're really hard to get, right? But in the middle of the roadshow, we got the license. So that was a bit contingent on raising, you know, 3 to 4 million in capital. So that was fantastic. Then once we had the money, the hard build, back-end systems, customer systems, making sure that you have this Q&A, that you actually, like we are an energy company, right? All the things that you do with your energy company, we had to do with a room full of really amazing people in Byron from scratch, you know, based on their industry knowledge. So that was a very, very full-on thing. This would not have been possible 5 years ago. Someone told the anecdote that Origin had invested something like $16 million in their energy wholesale trading and hedging capability. Like, obviously, you know, that's capital we don't have. But these days, because there's 1 million startups that do wholesale trading and different services, you know, everything is being disrupted. We could have this wonderful kind of outsource some things and insource other things. Keep the call center. We've employed 18 people. And there you go. We opened for business on, oh no, It was so exciting. There! So open for business on the 1st of June. And there we are on the trajectory where we told the market, to break even, we need this many customers. When we started out, it was 5,000 customers. But then, we have been scaling up. So we've now got over 3,000 customers. Our systems are stabilized. Of course, everything has changed along the way. Taking on board the comment from over here, of course, the business plan is a changing, living document. It's calibrated in the real market every day. The response of our executive and our staff, and the decisions that the board takes are really what kind of make or break what we do. And in the middle of that, we had this funny little thing happen last summer where suddenly the price spiked of wholesale energy from $500 to $14,000 per unit. And that's what caused all of your electricity prices to recently go up by 20%. We have a really unstable wholesale market in Australia. We've seen all kinds of issues in South Australia around weather. In Queensland and New South Wales, the allegation is that some of the big generators are making profits. So what they do is they game the system because they get, bonuses. And remember, the generators that are government-owned are paying dividends back to governments. So there's this perverse incentive because that money funds hospitals, and on we go. So we really were hit. We had to really respond, and we did. And so, we are now scaling up. And then, amazingly, she says, clicking that last slide, which they will help me with, because they're wonderful on the back. Keep going, keep going. No. She says, no, yes. Oh, it's okay. Start this in 2 seconds. We changed CEOs. So Steve promised us he'd get us to the stage where we'd be, kind of halfway there. And he said, okay, I'm 67, I'm out of here. And Tony Pfeiffer, retired from Ergon, is now joined as CEO. So we managed actually a CEO transition in our first year of operations, which is a really, really hard thing. So when we finished raising our capital, usually you have what's called like a deal dinner, and you give yourselves like little, things of crystal. That's what the bankers do, and you all say how wonderful and fabulous that is. But we had a picnic, and we didn't know how many people would come. So 400 people came, and this is a little video about the day. I know these guys are going to do it. Yay!
I invested in Enova because the idea of a community owning a renewable energy retailer I thought was fantastic.
To me, it's another step towards having a more sustainable way of actually living on the earth. One of the most powerful things that we can do to make this world a saner place and to look after the planet is to not only turn up to protests and stop things, but to actually create new, sustainable, viable alternatives that create the beautiful world that we want to live in.
And here was an opportunity for the community to get together and help reinforce that we can afford renewable energy, we can afford to buy it, and whoever wants to generate it, we can afford to buy it from them.
And hopefully we're going to build capacity, and eventually we're going to have our own storage. Maybe one day we'll have our own mini grid. We're going to put power back in the hands of the people. So I'm really, really happy to be part of it. And I'm just looking forward to seeing it go forward.
It's a very exciting time. I've spent the last 3 or 4 years being very involved in the coal seam gas fight here in the Northern Rivers. And this Enova is something that's not a fight. It's developing something that is positive, which is just incredible.
Today, we gathered here, to celebrate that we got together and formed a company, right, to sell electricity. Now, selling electricity is actually pretty boring, and whenever I used to get, a bill, I'd say, okay, it's a bill, it's just a bill. Electricity comes in, I use it, I pay a bill. But owning the company that sells electricity is exciting.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and welcome everybody. It really is fantastic to be part of a richly deserved celebration, isn't it? And when I look around, it's fantastic to see how many people from across the Northern Rivers are here. But for now, it's wonderful to be here with everybody to celebrate Enova. And so if we could, 3 cheers for Enova. Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Thank you.
So, as the magical PowerPoint comes back, yes. Yeah, I think you can see what's different about this model, right? Like, it's kind of hard to find things that feel authentic, isn't it? It's like, God, macro at Woolies, yes, maybe a little bit. But this really is the DNA of a community. And the kinds of local community projects that we're now doing are super exciting. So we now have a grant to do a first social housing project where we're putting solar panels on 50 homes. We've crowdfunded for 4 different local community groups that wanted to reduce their energy bill by having solar. We have a philanthropist in the region that basically said, I have $500,000 and I trust you guys to run a revolving debt fund. So when people want to borrow for install and then pay back, and so we're doing that. All 5 local councils in the region are collaborating and looking at models for working together. We've got an army of volunteers who have been trained up in energy efficiency, and they do audits and kind of door-to-door kind of stuff to help people reduce their energy bill. So it really is a model. And we offer now a 16-cent feed-in tariff. We have the largest kind of solar base out of any retailer in Australia. I think 46% of our customers already have solar, and a big chunk of them go for different amounts of green power. We worked with the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS to develop a new product where rather than giving you a discount back, which the major retailers do, we keep your discount so that we can invest it in local community generation projects. And we've partnered with Essential Energy to do our first installation at scale in the commercial park in Byron. That'll power 500 homes. And we're beginning to sign up MOUs with other groups. So the ACT government has a new kind of network of solar, and we will be purchasing energy for all those families when they go on stream. And it's pretty clear to me that this is a model that really makes sense. So how we're approaching our scale up, we hope and plan and are working incredibly hard to break even by June 2018. And then we will be paying dividends back to our shareholders, as well as we're already working with grants on nonprofit projects. So what we're doing now is we're starting up conversations with communities like yours. And the model is very, very straightforward. We will share our books with you. We publish our finances. There's no big, hairy company behind us. We are who we are. We understand our costs and our revenues. We will share 50% of our every year we'll reinvest, depending on the year. It might be 5% or 10%, things like upgrading software systems, et cetera, et cetera. After that reinvestment, the amount that we return, 50% will go to dividends. And in regions where we scale, 50% will go towards local projects. So what that means in practice is, if 1,000 customers came together in Wollongong to kickstart Wollongong Enova, you would be receiving $150,000 every year. And all we would ask is that there be a model around that so that that money goes towards a just energy transition. Local issues, local projects, research, whatever the model is. If you do the numbers on that and scale it up to 10,000, you can see that, it's a lot of money towards the community sector 20 years from now. If we execute this model correctly, we'll have millions and millions of dollars going towards very, very cool stuff. And it's not easy. So ask Tony, the CEO. It's really hard yards running a startup business, but we are really committed to, we had to increase prices along with everyone else because our costs went up, but our customers stayed with us. We have, we're pegged against AGL, so we're not more expensive. We just have all those other benefits on the side. And we really hope to crack the key thing of being able to co-design solutions with communities. So let me just leave you with the final slide, and there's a video on the back of that, which is our little community TV promotion, and you can see how fun it is to advertise when you have something really great. It's very different to other TV ads.